I'd like to welcome all of you to our second collaborative program with Maccabi World Union featuring Ido Aharoni. And this is our first program as a joint initiative to celebrate 100 years of the Maccabi Movement. Certainly a milestone and monumental accomplishment and impact in the Jewish community. And to celebrate that, we are partnering with Maccabi World Union and Ido to bring a series of programs. Tel Aviv University's Haller School of Management. He's a co-founder of consultancy Emerson Rigby Limited, a co-founder and managing partner of investment company EA2K, a member of the International Advisory Council of APCO Worldwide, a member of the Global Advisory Board of investment firm ValueBase, global ambassador for Maccabi World Union, member of the Board of Governors at Tel Aviv University, co-founder and global ambassador for the Genius 100 Visions, curated community, and the chairman of the Charney Forum for New Diplomacy. Aharoni is a 25-year veteran of Israel's Foreign Service. He is a public diplomacy specialist, founder of the Brand Israel program, and a well-known national branding practitioner. Ido has been Israel's longest-serving Consul General New York and tri-state area to date. He held that position with the rank of ambassador for 6 years, from 2010 to 2016, overseeing the operation of Israel's largest diplomatic mission worldwide. And as you can see, there's nobody better to co-host this forum with us. So Ido, I'd like to turn it over to you to introduce our guests and begin our program.
Well, thank you so much, Dan, for this lovely introduction. I was very impressed by my own bio. I don't know what about our guests, but very, very nice to be here again at a joint Maccabi World Union, Maccabi USA event. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of our leaders. Dana Berger, who heads the North American desk, is with us today. And please welcome our newly appointed emissary from Israel, Shachar Frank. Raise your hand, Shachar. He is based out of Philadelphia, and you'll be hearing from him in weeks and months to come. Very energetic guy. We're blessed to have him in North America. I see so many people here that I know. I just would like to acknowledge the presence of the great Tal Brody, who is an icon not only in Israeli sports, but is a popular culture icon, a champion of Israel as a brand. And we were smart enough in the Israeli government to offer him to be Israel's ambassador of goodwill. And he's doing it exceedingly well in the past 10 years. And he's a close personal friend of mine. We're also having a few other people here that played basketball in Israel. I think Peter Kessel played basketball in Israel. Am I right, Peter? Yeah, he says absolutely. Yes, my memory serves me right. You played in Israel. I remember you told me that. We have Jordan Schlachter here, formerly with the NBA. Now he's involved with new football initiatives. The great Arnie Filko is here. And who else do I see here? My good friend Lou Balcher is here. And of course, Fred Schoenfeld, whose son Steven is a very, very close friend of mine. So I feel at home, lots of people. And of course, I see Ari Ackerman also is here. Good to be among so many friends. We have two very esteemed guests. Let me just say a couple of words about each of them. And then the way it's going to work, I will present the question to both. They will answer the question separately. And then at one point, we will turn this into a discussion, open the floor. Feel free to use the chat function to present your question. And with your permission, I just would like to say a few words about our guest. First, I'd like to introduce Jay Fiedler, born in 1971. As you all know, is a former NFL quarterback. He played 76 games as quarterback in the NFL, starting 60 of them, threw 69 touchdowns, and was inducted into the National Jewish Museum of Sports Hall of Fame in 2002. He was born in Oceanside, New York, played college for Dartmouth, where he set school records for touchdown passes, 58, passing yards, and the total offense. And he played for the Philadelphia Eagles, 94, 95, the Minnesota Vikings, 98, and the Jacksonville Jaguars in 1999 until he landed a longer stint with the Miami Dolphin. I think he's mostly known for that between the years 2000 2004. In 2008, unfortunately, he retired due to his shoulder injury. Currently, he's a co-owner of a CBA basketball expansion team, the East Kentucky Miners, which is based in Pikeville, Kentucky. He also owns and operates the Sports Academy at Brookwood Camps, and the Primetime Sports Camps along with his brother Scott. And most importantly, he's married to my very dear friend Molly Fiedler, who is right now on this call from Minnesota. So, welcome to Jay Fiedler.
Thank
Our
you, Ido.
second guest today is the phenomenal Howard Beck, born in 68 in Oakland, California, although originally, and I had a conversation with him about the history of his family. The family's from the Bronx. He is a journalist, mostly known for covering the NBA for the Los Angeles Daily News, the New York Times, the Bleacher Report, and more recently for Sports Illustrated. At the LA Daily News, he covered the Los Angeles Lakers. When he was with the New York Times, naturally, he mostly covered the Knicks, although he had some assignments covering the Brooklyn Nets during their first season in Brooklyn. In 2013, he left the New York Times for the Bleacher Report. In the beginning of 2017, he started a new program called the Full 48 podcast. And he hosted in his podcast people like NBA Commissioner Adam Silver, LA Laker owner Jeannie Buss, and other luminaries from the world of entertainment and sports. Sports Illustrated retained Howard's services in 2020, just as the pandemic was discovered. And today he is an NBA senior writer and co host of the Crossover podcast with Chris Mannix. He was raised in California. He's a graduate of UC Davis, and he also served as the editor in chief of the campus paper. And he currently resides in Brooklyn. One thing we know already that both Howard and Jay have in common is that they're both under the same blizzard. And I welcome you, Howard.
Thank you.
So,
Appreciate that.
dear friends, first of all, thank you for being here. The first question that I'd like to pose to both of you, we'll start with Jay and then we'll go to Howard, is if you can recall how you first developed an interest in what you ended up doing, which became your defining career. In your case, playing football. In your case, Howard writing. So we'll start with you, Jay.
Well, sure. Thank you, Ido, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, everyone who's on here for joining. Um, I grew up in Long Island, the son of two teachers. My mom was a elementary school teacher. My dad was a phys ed teacher and high school basketball coach in New York City, and had a pretty large, extensive sports background. He played college basketball. He played some semi-pro football and basketball. Was a track coach, a basketball coach. Coached some, pretty amazing players at Springfield Gardens High School in Queens. Most notably Anthony Mason, who went on to play in the NBA, as well as Norm Roberts, who's now assistant coach at Kansas basketball. So I grew up around sports. I was going tagging along to my dad's practices when I was a young kid, shooting the basketball around while the practices were going on. And from the time I was 5 years old, I was participating in every sport imaginable. I ran cross country as a 5-year-old. I played soccer, basketball, baseball, football. My older brother, who's 3 years older than me, started playing football when he was 7 or 8 years old. And when I was 6, I was still too young to play in the tackle league, but I begged my dad that I wanted to play with my brother because I did everything else with him. And he went in and fibbed a little bit about my birth certificate, added a year to my age, and I was off and playing football from 6 years old on. So from that point on, again, I was a multi-sport kid growing up. I played everything, like I said, in high school. I was a football, basketball, track and field athlete, and even in college, went on and competed in football and track and field as well. So, sports was always in my blood. Um, it really wasn't until my junior year in college that the thought of taking my sports background into a career became imaginable. And I had a pretty tremendous junior season at Dartmouth, led the nation in passing, was the Ivy League Player of the Year. And that was the point that, I realized that I had a shot at making it to the NFL. And, through a long journey, was able to get into the league. I was out of the league for a couple of years, and then ultimately worked my way through, a lot of hard work and some fortunate circumstances to become the starting quarterback in Miami and follow Dan Marino down there, becoming the starting quarterback for the next 5 years in Miami.
Now, growing up, who were your sporting idols?
Well, growing up in New York, with the big basketball background, I was a huge Knicks fan. Bernard King, was the top player in football. As a Jets fan, watching Richard Todd and Freeman McNeil and Wesley Walker play out there. And then, also with my track and field background, I was, very big into the decathletes. So when Dan and Dave and the big Reebok commercials were coming out for the LA Olympics in 1984, they were big idols of mine, and that was eventually what I ended up performing in track and field and decathlon as well.
Wonderful, and that's that I'd like to turn to Howard and present the same question. When did you realize that this was your destiny, writing about sports?
Well, thank you, Ido, and I could say that it's interesting hearing Jay's kind of path because one, I noticed at least two things that we have in common. I also ran cross country, so there's that. That's probably my highest athletic achievement, though, and that stopped somewhere in high school. I also had a love of football growing up, but at some point I did not realize that, or did realize that I had no path to the NFL. So I grew up in the Bay Area, and where I am now makes no sense on a number of levels. But this is my story. I grew up a huge Niners fan. The Warriors were pretty much crappy for most of my childhood, so the NBA wasn't really big in the Bay Area, but the Niners were huge, and I grew up in the Joe Montana era. So my love of sports, which leads eventually to an interest in sports writing, is all about Joe Montana and Montana to Clark and the catch in 1982 in the NFC Championship game. That's basically where I can trace everything back to, because I was 13 at the time. That is what sparks this whole other passion of mine, because the excitement of that moment, when you're 13 years old, it sets off something else emotionally and otherwise. And so that leads to me being really interested in reading everything I can about the Niners every day. So I'm reading the San Jose Mercury News Sports section every day. And it just kind of grows from there. And so, that's, most people get into sports writing because they were sports fans first. And when you become a sports writer, you lose the fandom along the way. But it was the fandom and those passions that drove it. And yeah, I had a little interest in some of the other sports too. I followed, baseball. I was a big A's fan for, a time. And, basketball was always something that was kind of off on the side. So as I say, that where I ended up, that I've now been covering the NBA for 24 years makes no sense, because if you were to ask me when I was a teenager and first deciding, that maybe I wanted to go do this for a living, I would have said the NFL by far would have been my first choice. That's what I would have wanted to cover. That's what I spent all my waking hours thinking about, other than school. So, but it didn't end up that way, because the media industry is funny. You just kind of take the paths, you follow the forks in the road as they come, and you choose one direction or another, and you can't predict where you would end up. I couldn't have predicted where I would end up, that's for sure. And I actually had a detour for a good 5-year stretch where I was covering news, local government for a couple of small town papers in California before the opportunity to cover the Lakers came up at the LA Daily News in '97. So, yeah, my path makes no sense, but that's part of the fun of it, I guess.
Can you tell us when was the first time you had a chance to interview one of your idols?
Yeah, so actually, I went to school at UC Davis, where I was working at the student newspaper, and the professional paper, the real newspaper in town, the Davis Enterprise. The sports editor there would, every so often lob us an opportunity to freelance for the Davis Enterprise. And so I think it was while I was still at UC Davis when I did this, I actually got to go down and cover a Niner game on the Enterprise's credential, and got to be in that scrum around Montana at his locker. I don't even remember what year it was, but and that's one of those mind-blowing, so when you're in this industry, you lose the awe and all the other things that go with sports fandom, right? I'm not in awe of supreme athletes anymore in the same way. With the things that they can do, yes, but not as celebrities. Sorry, Jay.
I don't
if but at that moment in time, when I'm in college and I'm still more fan than journalist, probably being able to go to a Niner game, to go and they take you down on the field, the media, they start bringing everybody down. I don't know if they still do this, probably not now during pandemic times, but they would bring everybody from the press box down to the field. And so I was standing behind, all the Niners players, coaches, everybody else for the last few minutes of the game, so that when the game ends, everybody's already in position to then be herded toward the locker room and the press conference room and all that. So being on the field at Candlestick Park, being in the locker room and in the press conference where, these players who I grew up, many of whom I grew up rooting for and idolizing, that was a moment. Now, again, eventually over time, the novelty of that kind of wears off, and it's just, it's a job. It's a great job, but it's a job. But yeah, I think that was, I don't know that I actually met Joe Montana, like actually got to shake his hand or anything, but I will always remember being kind of in his presence of this guy who really sparked my love of sports. And again, at the time I couldn't have known where it would lead, but that's what sets me on the path.
Which leads me to my next question. And that is, of course, the discussion, which I can understand where it comes from, and it's being fueled by media, by social media, by the algorithm. And that is, of course, the discussion about the GOAT. What sparked the discussion is The Last Dance and LeBron James's claim for respect. You see, the Last Dance is a beautiful production by Netflix, probably largely controlled by a certain degree by Michael Jordan himself. And that sparked the whole debate, which goes way beyond basketball. Who was the GOAT? You mentioned Montana. Who's the greatest quarterback of all time? Who's the greatest center? Greatest time, and so on and so forth. My question to you, both of you, is what's behind this discussion? And is it possible at all to say who's the greatest of all time?
Go ahead, Jay.
Sure.
And of course, the obvious question is, who's your greatest? Go ahead, Jay.
Well, look, I think the discussion is has been a discussion that's been going on for decades, generations. I remember, my dad talking about the athletes that he used to watch, and it was always Jim Brown, as a football player. My dad's generation, knew Jim Brown as the greatest ever. And, when guys like Barry Sanders and Walter Payton and other great running backs, Emmitt Smith, were setting records, the discussion always came up. And, obviously in the quarterback realm, now you have Tom Brady, who rightfully so is in that discussion as the greatest of all time. But you also have to, there's really no way of comparing, the generations. The game is so much different, especially the game of football. The game is so much different today than it was 20 years ago when I started playing in the NFL, and it was 20 years, before me.
Well, by the way, could you enlighten us on this issue? What are the main changes, briefly? What are the main changes? What is the difference different today than it was 20 years ago?
Sure. I think the biggest focus are the rules changes, that affect offensive football, that affect the statistics. The rules changes. Number one, just to help offensive football and to create more scoring opportunities for the offense started, about 20, 30 years ago when they got rid of, a lot of the defensive secondary rules of being able to, number one, keep contact on receivers all the way down the field. They cut that to a 5-yard rule where they can only contact receivers in the first 5 yards. And then, as well, in more recent days with the concussion issue and keeping guys healthy, there are a lot of rules that take away, some of the big hits downfield as well, which has helped to aid, the offensive passing explosion that we're seeing today. I think if you look at statistically, the top 10 or 15, quarterbacks of all time, statistic wise, right now, probably 90% of them are current players. And that's just because the statistics have exploded, over more recent years with touchdown passes, with yards, with passing efficiency. And, so to make those comparisons based on stats is extremely difficult to do, especially in the sport of football. I think you just have to do it more subjectively and based on how a player played, within the realm of their generation of football. And guys like Joe Montana, really was a guy who was far above anyone else playing at his time. So he's certainly got to be in the discussion. It's not to say that Tom Brady isn't, wouldn't be the greatest, but it's a subjective discussion that there is no a clear answer to.
Yeah, there's no clear answer in any sport, and I'm never going to be one to tell fans or other media members not to have this debate, because the debate is fun. But there's no objective answer in any of these sports, certainly not in basketball. As Jay said with the NFL, the NBA, and I think more than any of the other major sports, the NBA is constantly evolving. They're constantly changing the rules, and every era is so dramatically different. I mean, you look at where the NBA is now. I mean, I've covered the league for 24 years, which sounds long, doesn't feel as long as it is. But even in the time I've been covering it, the dramatic changes just in the emphasis on 3-point shooting, the de-emphasis on post play, and big men dominating. Big men dominated this game for decades. And now I don't want to say they're an afterthought, because we have some incredibly talented centers in the NBA right now, Nikola Jokic in Denver and Joel Embiid and Anthony Davis, but they played much, much differently than the giants of yesteryear. They don't play like Kareem and Wilt and Shaq and Hakeem and Patrick Ewing. It's a different game. And that's mostly to the NBA's benefit, that the game is constantly evolving. But it makes it that much more fraught to try to compare whether it's teams or players across eras. And, the Jordan versus LeBron debate, it will never go away. There are times that I think we're all just sick of it and wish it would just cease, but it's never going to cease. And it's endlessly fascinating because, again, there is no objective answer here. Is it about championships? Because if it's about championships, you could say, well, then Bill Russell should be considered the GOAT because he won 11. Like if it's all about scoreboard, Bill Russell's got it hands down. If it's about being undefeated in the finals, or maybe it's just the modern era, then you lean Jordan, and he's 6-0, and LeBron is 4-7 or whatever it is. But LeBron went to more finals than Jordan. Does that count for anything? Is it about skill set or just what you achieved? Is it about how much you uplifted your teammates? Look at some of the teams that LeBron dragged to the finals that I don't think too many other players in history could have gotten to. So you could go around and around and around in these things. And again, it's fine. Like, I think the discussion is fun. I don't think it's particularly productive in the sense that I don't think we're ever going to get to any specific answer. And then the other thing that comes into play, I'll leave you with this, is it is so much generational. If you came up on Kareem, if that was your era where the NBA first really resonated for you, then Kareem's going to be your guy forever. If you came up in the 90s, you're Jordan guy forever. Younger fans, it's LeBron over Jordan. And that's just how it goes. I came up on Joe Montana. I've got no time for Tom Brady. It's Joe Montana until the end for me. I don't care. Like, I don't even want to hear stats. I don't want to hear facts. I don't want to hear logic. It's Joe Montana. That's it.
And I think what you're both saying is that we can't have this discussion outside of the specific cultural context of the time. And I think that's a very good answer. And
well, you could have the discussion. It's just you're not going to come to a clear answer.
Yeah, it's going to be an exercise in futility, obviously. And you mentioned your father's fascination with Jim Brown, and you mentioned Joe Montana, and to go back to the question of historical context, when I was first introduced sports and in Israel in I was born in 1962, so we had no knowledge of baseball, no knowledge of American football. American basketball was brought to Israel twice, first by the Jews of Egypt that learned basketball from the American troops during World War II. That happened in the 1950s, and then 1960s, people like Tal this brought the second wave of American basketball, and they changed the standard. When I grew up, the only way for me to watch NBA games was to go every Friday afternoon to a certain hotel lobby in Tel Aviv, where an El Al captain would bring a VHS tape of an NBA game. We would watch it in the hotel lobby. This is 19. The champ came to play in Israel. So we now live in a different era. There's so much information. There's so many stimulations taking place simultaneously. We call it the age of information overload. My question to you, Jay and Howard, is it good for sports? This saturation, some say oversaturation of information, many other things. It becomes a place where people can manipulate, people invent new mutations like esports and fantasy sports. Is it considered to be sports at all in your eyes? What do you think of this information revolution? And
Shall I go? Sure.
Go for it.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think.
yeah, please.
Yeah, I think it's amazing, how global, really every sport now is becoming because of the internet, because of access that fans across the world can have in various sports, and for giving some of the censored countries around the world. But like for me in football, for example, I went and played in Europe for a couple of years. I played for 1 year. Played in for the Amsterdam Admirals, the World League of Football, that ultimately became NFL Europe. And when I was out there, it was really it was difficult to educate the fans out there as to really how the game of football was played. I think the teams that were in Germany knew the game much better because of the army influence of the American soldiers and the number of bases that were out in Germany. So when we played in Berlin and Dusseldorf, you could definitely feel a much greater appreciation of the game in those cities than when we went to at the time, London, really didn't know football. Obviously, over the past, number of years, the NFL has opened the doors and taken games to England and London, and that's expanded it very much so. So when I was out there, really, there wasn't a whole lot of interest in football. And then, I ended up going back out to Europe a few years ago. I travel out there annually to recruit for my summer camp business, and to get some campers and staff members from France and the UK and Spain. And when I returned a few years ago, I ended up watching the Super Bowl at the embassy in London, the U.S. Embassy in London, and I was amazed at how many more people really knew the sport, by that time. So, over the course of 15, 20 years, the growth has been, exponential from what I saw when I played the sport, back to, in the late 90s until I was back out there watching the sport with other fans a few years ago. So, the knowledge is far beyond what it was a long time ago. And it's obviously from a monetization level, the sports organizations are really capitalizing on it. The NBA going globally into China, with the huge push there, with the NFL going into Europe. There's been talk over the past few years of an expansion team in Europe. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but just the talk of it has expanded the fan base and brought more fans into the sport.
Now, you're saying that this saturation of information really accelerated the pace of things. Is this also the reason why we see less and less franchise players in all sports? Stars are more readily interested or inclined to move to other teams. Take Kyrie Irving, for example, moving from one team to another instead of, you know, the more traditional approach of becoming a star, a franchise player in one team.
Well, I'm not sure that's a result of the fan base. I think the fans having access to all the information has exploded. Fantasy interest, fantasy football, fantasy baseball, that has really exploded. But from the players' side, it's more just the outcome of free agency, which in the NFL kind of opened up in the early 90s with the Reggie White rule, and since then, free agency has kind of given the players a little bit more ability to dictate where they play rather than being beholden to the team that drafts them.
Yeah. Howard, what do you think about this explosion of information, the expansion of physical sports, the fantasy sports? What does it do to the athletes themselves? I mentioned Kyrie as an example, but there are many others.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of layers to that, and a lot of different directions we could take that. I mean, I'll just say this. I started covering the NBA, and I started in newspapers in the 90s at a time when the internet was still in its infancy. And the way that the internet has changed the media, that could be, a whole volume of books in itself, and probably is. But it has changed my job. Twitter has changed the job. The internet has changed the job. The immediacy of information that we can both disseminate and consume has changed the job. The direct interaction we have with our readers, the same people who are the fans, the athletes have direct access to their fans via Twitter and Instagram. We have direct access to our readers that way too. And so the response, positive, negative, or otherwise, is instant. And so sometimes, you're getting the reaction in real time. I may be writing something, but before I write the story or while I'm working on it, I might tweet something along the same lines, and I might get a bunch of people now screaming at me about that premise, and then it might actually inform my thinking, like, you know what, maybe I need to emphasize this other thing more than this, or maybe, I need to reframe this. Like,
So you're
it's seriously
recalibrating on the move.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, think about it this way too. I don't cover games anymore, right? I do features, I do analysis, I do in-depth stories. I don't write about games anymore specifically most of the time. But I spent 16 years as a beat writer, 7 on the Lakers and 9 primarily on the Knicks, where I'm covering every game those teams play, and I'm on deadline every night. Pre-internet, there was one way of doing it. Once the internet comes along, once Twitter comes along, I can now be watching the game, looking at my screen, seeing fans and other media people reacting in real time to what's going on the court. I might have missed something. And now they're saying, "Ooh, there was this little, scuffle in the corner. Oh, the coach just snapped at this guy while he was going back to the bench." Now I know that, and I wouldn't have known it. Or everybody's, chirping about a non-call or something. You don't see or you don't see everything in real time necessarily at the game. There's a lot of distractions, and besides, you can only look in one place at a time. But if Twitter is open and I'm bouncing kind of between the game and Twitter, I am learning how fans are reacting to the game in real time. And that can actually, there's a great example of this, and it's not a game. The year that Michael Jordan was inducted into the Naismith Hall of Fame, I went to the Hall of Fame to cover it, and there's a huge assembly hall that they use for this, and there's maybe a few thousand people that are in there, right? And it's all invited guests, right? This is a very exclusive ticket. Maybe there's some sold to the general public too, but it's I don't know, maybe let's say 5,000 people at most in this hall. And then there's a press workroom that is outside of the main hall. A lot of the media watched it from back there on a TV feed, on a closed circuit feed, and I stayed in the hall itself. Michael Jordan gets up and gives what is now considered one of the all-time speeches. Famously, infamously, however you want to perceive it, Michael Jordan lit some people on fire that night. And in the hall itself, people were laughing at all the jokes, all the jabs, all the cut downs, all the grievances he was airing. People were eating it up. And so watching it in there, I'm like, wow, man, this is wild. This is an all-timer here. I walk back into the workroom and I go to sit down to start writing my story. And as I sit down, I look at my friend Michael Lee from the Washington Post. He looks up at me and just has this look on his face. I'm like, what? He's like, man, damn. I'm like, what? He's like, and so he starts telling me like the way everybody was reacting in the room, not to mention the way people were reacting on Twitter. Well, my perception was colored by the fact that I was in the hall where it was a lot of basketball dignitaries and families and players and coaches. It was a different crowd. It was not going over well on TV and to the general public. Thank God I was clued into that, because as I started to write the story, I realized I definitely needed to contextualize this as something that was perceived by a lot of people as being overly harsh, overly negative, ungraceful, unbecoming. I didn't see it that way in real time, as I say, because people were mostly laughing in the hall. So that's that is an example of just how the immediacy of the internet, social media, and as you put it, Ido, saturation. Well, it helps inform us sometimes. Sometimes it's overload. We have more stats than we know what to do with right now. There are a bazillion ways to parse those stats and contextualize them and distort them. So there are, and you can see video of everything now. You can go to an NBA box score and click on a link that will show you every shot by a specific player in that game, or just every make by that player in a specific game, or every turnover by that player in a specific game. So we have more tools than ever, more information than ever. It can suck your whole day away if you let it. But in general, as a journalist, I'm going to say that more information is better than less.
That's the big dilemma. And we have so many people here that are eager to ask you questions. But before that, before I open this and read the questions to you, I know that our dear friend Tal Brody wanted to say a few words. And Shahar, is it okay to unmute Tal Brody?
Yeah, for sure. He can mute and yeah, go ahead.
Please, Tal, go ahead.
Yes, first of all, it's great to see so many of the faces that I have known since Maccabi USA brought me to Israel in 1965, 1966, the 7th Maccabi Games. And it's an honor to meet Jay and also Howard, and to hear about the football players that you mentioned. I couldn't believe myself. It was like Clint Eastwood say, they made my day when Robert Kraft came to Israel, and they asked me to speak and meet with the NBA, with the NFL legends that he brought. And all of a sudden I see before me Jim Brown, Roger Staubach, Joe Montana, David Baker, that's runs the Hall of Fame. And God, I mean, I couldn't believe it. These are my childhood guys, And then with Howard, we played out in Los Angeles. We played against the last days of Magic Johnson. And Jerry Buss was great giving us the basketball arena for that game. And I have to say, Donald Sterling was okay himself when we played the Clippers twice during the same swing during that period of time. And what you said about the game has changed and about players. There's one thing that all that media and all that noise around it that's made, because when I came out of college and Rick Barry, Billy Cunningham, Bill Bradley, Jerry Sloan, Gail Goodrich from UCLA, all of us signed for $12,500 a year, when Wilt Chamberlain was making $100,000 and Bill Russell $101,000 a year. Now, all that noise, all that media, all that television shot it up that compared to Shaquille O'Neal, I don't know if they can, you can Chamberlain and Russell or any less, but Shaquille was going home with over $30 million in his pocket without the advertising and everything. So the game has changed, as Jay said, because of the rules. The rules have changed. We could only dribble up and down. We couldn't dribble, and on the side. And if we would put the ball, I know my high school coach, if I would put the ball through my legs, I would sit on the bench. It wouldn't be out on the floor. What are you doing? You're hot dogging it over there? And then the 3-point shot, the whole game has changed. You don't need the Chamberlains and the Russells and the Shaquille O'Neals and the Abdul Jabbar, because they're not as influential as Steph Curry and Thompson and all those Russell Westbrook and Beal and all these guys that are hitting the 3-pointer and 40 points a game, 30 points a game, 40, 50. Somebody got 60 points the other day. So a lot of things have changed because of the rules, not that the fact that I think that Oscar Robertson and Jerry West were the greatest players during that period of time. But in compared to Michael Jordan, to LeBron James, in the new period of time, it's tough to, you would say automatically Michael Jordan and, LeBron James, but you can't forget Oscar Robertson and Jerry West during that era, or Bob Cousy during the times of the Celtics during the start of those 11 championships, So the era's changed, but you have to remember those guys that made the era. And Jay can tell you, as he went through that list of players, there's so many great players that were in Jay's period of time that he could probably even rate with some of those guys, but it changes.
I have to tell our friends a story. Tal was born in Trenton, New Jersey, and when I was serving as a consul general, I was invited to give an address at the New Jersey State Senate. And I was thinking, what can I say to them? They're interested in their own state affairs. And I saw driving into Trenton, there's a big sign that says Trenton makes, the world takes. And so I decided to give them an example of a person that Trenton made and we took. And that person really changed Israeli basketball forever. And we every time I see Tal, I make sure that I thank him on behalf of all the people that love basketball. He also instilled pride in every Israeli. All right, so we have lots of great questions. One question from Marvin Glassman to you, Jay, asking if there's a reason why the Dolphins had three, not one, not two Jewish quarterbacks throughout their history. Yourself, Says Rosenfels, and Rosen. And
Uh,
also,
is there a reason? I don't know if there's any particular reason. I'd like to say I did so well that Dolphins, just decided that they wanted to try and bring a couple more in. But it just happened to be circumstance. And of course, what better place than in the U.S. other than New York to have a Jewish quarterback than in Miami?
yeah, and Peter Cassell is asking, Jay, how upset were you um, when you see the money 5 years starting quarterbacks get these days, and when you did realize that Bernie Kosar was not Jewish? Funny question. Funny question.
Yeah, well, that is funny. A lot of people did, mistakenly think that Bernie Kosar was Jewish for a number of years, but I think I knew early on that he wasn't. And look, I'm happy for the players now that are able to make the money that they make. The sport's exploded. The business of the sport has really exploded. If there's anyone I'm mad at my parents for not waiting another 10 years to have me. That way I'd be able to take advantage of of the current situation. But no, I did well for myself, and look, the people, like I said, the people 10, 15 years before me were complaining about the salaries that I was making. So, it always keeps increasing, the farther along that you get. And I just
Howard,
want
there's
to
a
say, I just
question.
wanted to say one thing, Ido, and I was remiss early on with the first question to mention that growing up, I did play for the youth Maccabi games in the sport of basketball, and went to the Maccabi games in Chicago in 1988. And I just want to give a shout out to my coach of that team from the Long Island delegation, Marty Rigger, who's on the Zoom right now. So I just want to say hi to Marty.
Wow, so this is a reunion. Marty, say hi. Marty, can you unmute Marty, please?
There
Marty,
he
can
is.
you hear me?
Still muted.
Oh, here he is.
Marty, you
Marty,
have to unmute yourself.
Marty, you can unmute yourself.
Got you.
All right.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
It just
Yeah,
brings
so-
back some really great memories of Jay when he was 17 years old, and we got all the way to the finals against LA, and nobody even thought about us, but there was Jay doing his best. A couple of our players fouled out, and Jay basically put us on those broad shoulders of his and almost single-handedly won us a gold medal. And, we've seen Jay, and I was friendly with his dad. So, the Fiedler family has always been very, very close to my heart. And it's just wonderful seeing Jay again and seeing what he has become. I always knew it.
What position did you play, Jay?
I was a two guard.
Two guard. All right, terrific. Okay, wonderful, wonderful reunion. Howard, we have a question for you from Marvin, asking you if you're surprised that the NBA has resumed games despite the pandemic, the bubble was a big success. Do you think that what's happening now is also a big success? And if not, what would you do to change it?
Well, yeah, the bubble was a huge success, but the NBA had an advantage last year compared to the other sports in North America, which was that they only had a partial season to finish. You know, whatever they played 8 games to finish out the regular season and then the playoffs. And so a bubble, by definition, if it's going to work, you have to basically keep everybody out, keep the players and the folks who need to be in, and that's it, hermetically sealed. If you can do that, if you can pull that off, and if you can get everybody to buy in for 3 months and have no one violate the rules, which for the most part, I mean, they did it fabulously. That's great. And they deserve all the credit in the world for pulling it off. But I said many times at the time and since then, that was the easy part. Because if you can get everybody to agree to be in a bubble and stick with it, okay, there's no COVID. You can do that. You can accomplish that. You can't do that for a full season, though. Even a 72 game, a shortened season with 10 games shaved off, it's too long. You can't sequester everybody from their families and from the world for that long. It's not reasonable. And no one was ever going to be able to attempt that. So the NBA is now doing the best they can, given the conditions around them. And we know what the conditions in this country are. It's abysmal. And, they restarted at a time when COVID was hitting its peak and has continued to only rise over the last month or so since the NBA restarted. Those are the conditions that they're operating within. So everything that the NBA does, they can take all the measures that they want, create all the rules that they want, get all the buy-in that they can. Guys are home. They're in their home markets. They're with their families and friends. And, we all know, we've all been living this for the last year. It's hard to just cut yourself off socially and otherwise. So they've had some games. I think it's 24 games now that have been postponed in a month of play because of either guys having COVID or just being in contact tracing. And I think the NBA should be credited for that, because the teams that couldn't play because they didn't have enough available bodies, it's mostly because not that guys were sick, but that guys were in contact tracing, which just shows you the NBA is exercising the most caution that they can. They should be praised for that because they're trying to keep people safe. And it has cost them games, at least in the short term. But look, there's a financial reality. We all know what that is. There are billions of dollars at stake. If you just shut down until the pandemic is over, however we define over, you're going to lose a lot of money. You're going to cost jobs. You may even lose a couple of franchises for all I know. I don't know how long they could sustain without playing at all. But I think there are limits. I think what the NBA has done so far has made sense. But I also think that, for instance, the All-Star game, which they are in the midst of trying to finalize, is a luxury they can't afford. I don't agree with them trying to play an All-Star game in Atlanta in March. It's not critical. Is it critical to have a season on some level, business-wise and otherwise? Sure, you can justify that. But the All-Star game, you can pick All-Star teams and still have those honors go down in the books without actually playing the game. And that wouldn't be unprecedented. They've done that in lockout years. So that, to me, is taking an undue risk. But that's the call they're making. And I'm sure it's largely because of, again, all the money at stake.
Yeah, all the revenue. Yeah. And I hope that your message will reach them. There's another wonderful and moving reunion that we're just discovering. It turns out that Marty also coached Jordan Schlachter in 2003 in Chile. Jordan played for Harvard University, if I'm not mistaken, and where Jordan met his wife. So it's getting even more exciting here. Let me tell you, Dana, we should do those webinars more often, because the things that we're discovering are just amazing. We'll end with the ultimate and inevitable question raised by Nitza to both of you. What would you say, and would you encourage a young athlete who aspires to go professional? What would you say to them? And I would add to that, what would you say to the local Maccabi chapter that they can do in order to attract more kids to participate?
Well,
We'll start with you, Jay.
Sure. My advice to young kids, and I work with with young athletes all the time, you know, in both my football training business and my summer camp business. So I have access to speak to young athletes, you know, throughout the year, and you know, what I always say to them is, you know, in order to pursue something that far, you have to love what you're doing. And if you don't love it, if you don't love practicing, if you don't love, you know, all the tedious stuff that goes into making yourself better, and take care of everything, you know, outside of the sport as well, you know, to give you the success, then you're not going to get there. You know, there are so many resources that are available to help you get better, to give you access to coaching, to give you access to knowledge in the game. But if there's not that self uh, motivation that comes from within, to outwork everyone, to you know, to get up earlier than everyone, and continue, and again, you know, just loving what you're doing, and not necessarily loving playing the game, but loving practicing, and loving working hard, and loving you know, being around your teammates, then you're not going to get too far in anything.
Howard?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would take it in a slightly different direction as the non-professional athlete on this panel. You know, I think probably everybody who's on this Zoom call is a sports fan on some level, to varying degrees of how far your passion takes you with the sport, whether it's just to watch, or whether it's participating, whether it's being a weekend warrior, whether it's competing up to a certain point in your life and then finding other pursuits. I mean, you know, for me, you know, sports, I was the only one in my family who even was remotely decent, and I would, remotely decent is being generous, at anything sports wise. My brothers were not athletic at all. My parents didn't really, and I was the only one who watched too. But that was what sparked me as a kid. That was what drove me. And, you know, look, when I was 14 years old, you know, I wanted to be a wide receiver for the 49ers. That probably wasn't going to work out. Although, because I ran track and cross country, when they signed Ronaldo Nehemiah, the track star way back when, remember Willie Gault had been signed by the Bears and was actually pretty good. And so the Niners were trying to do the same thing. And I was like, well, if Ronaldo Nehemiah can make it, never mind that Ronaldo Nehemiah is about 8 billion times faster than me. Like, wow, maybe that's the, you know, I'm a runner. Like, that's how I define my athletic, you know, endeavors at the time. Maybe that's my route. I could be, you know, no.
Yeah, but you might have had better hands than Ronaldo.
It's a low bar. But you know, having the passion for sports, for watching sports, for playing two-hand touch in the street in San Jose, you know, out in front of our house, that it did put me on a path in terms of sports writing. And obviously, this is a career that has defined my entire adult life, and has been a great way to make a living, and see a lot of the world, and meet fine folks like all of you here. And like, it's been a great life that this little spark from when I'm 13 has spawned. And so I would just say that, you know, because we can't all be pro athletes, if I was addressing a room full of kids or teenagers who have that passion, who really, you know, dream of playing in the NBA or the NFL or the WNBA, I would just say, pursue it to the hilt, and follow all the great advice that Jay Fiedler just gave you about needing to work and loving the work and all that, because it's all obviously true. But then realizing that if you love sports and the goal is to somehow be around sports, there's so many other ways. You can write about sports, you can broadcast about sports, you can be a trainer, you can be a coach. You can get in, hell, if you're great with numbers, now you can come in the analytics route and find a career in sports that way. There are sports lawyers, of course, and agents. And like, you don't realize it when you're a kid. You just think, oh, if I could just, you know, if I could shoot like Steph, you know, if I could throw the deep ball like Jay Fiedler, you know, that's how we all simplistically think of it as fans, and especially when we're kids. But you realize later that there are so many avenues to get involved and follow your passions another way, and then still apply all the things that Jay was just talking about in terms of being willing to put in the hard work and outwork everybody else, because even jobs within the sports industry are incredibly competitive. So it's not the same high bar as it is to be a pro athlete, but still there's a limited number of these teams and a limited number of those jobs. So I think that's what I would tell kids.
Well, on this happy note, I'd like to thank all of you for even staying a couple of minutes longer than what we promised. I just wanted to thank you both, our wonderful guests, Jay Fiedler and Howard Beck. I feel like I could have continued this conversation for hours. I'd like to thank a wonderful group that gathered here to have this discussion, which will be available on Maccabi USA website. Lastly, I just wanted to mention Jordan Schlachter asked me to remind Jay that he played with your brother Scott.
Yes, I know. I've known
you know
Jordan
that-
for a long time through that connection. My brother played in two of the Pan Am Maccabi teams, one in Venezuela, I think, and one in Uruguay where he played with Jordan.
Also a
And,
two guard. Who is the better two guard, Jay?
I'm not gonna answer. Actually, Scott's not on it. I was.
And I just would like to, I don't know if I acknowledge the presence of my dear friend Ari Ackerman, who's part owner of the Marlins, who's here with us. And maybe we should have him discuss Major League Baseball next time. But from Jerusalem, I say goodbye to all of you. Thank you for being part of this wonderful event, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Ido. Thank you everyone for joining us. We'll leave the conversation a little bit longer and the event live. Feel free to stay. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Ido.
everyone.
Hey, Howard, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.